So there's a little 3-question survey for all realtors. And the question is ultimately, they want to use this survey to gain some insight on how realtors view cyber fraud, and how we can protect clients and real estate professionals from it and guide future product development. Should be a really interesting thing. This is a company that we've been connected with for quite a while called Certified. Let's see if I can include all of this.
The new seller wire verification, and that's a big deal.
So not through realtors. This is through the realtors. What we're hoping to get is their insight on how their clients view cyber fraud and where that can where we can help in that way.
I'm starting to see more people recognizing that it's a real thing versus the old, that it's going to happen to somebody else, it'll never happen to me attitude that we see with most other issues. You know, clients are less resistant to our suggestions, my 2 cents worth.
Clients are less resistant to the cyber fraud suggestions.
Versus, you pick any other issue, whether getting an illness or your car breaking down. People generally, the default setting is it happens to other people, but it won't happen to me.
Mm-hmm. That is very true.
Now they're starting to recognize it might happen to me, so they seem more pliable.
So I just put into the chat feature the link. You can click either the first link or the second, but it's certified.typeform.com. And it basically is I'll show the screen so that people can see what it looks like before they actually have to sign on. So you can help protect others by answering 3 short questions. And ultimately, has your team dealt with a fraud or fraud attempt in the last 12 months? Has a client asked to learn more about fraud in the last 12 months? And how do you verify the identity of a client? Check or make a copy of their ID, use an identity verification tool, no standard practice, or other. Mike, how do realtors verify a buyer or seller's identity?
Well, you get a lot of different answers, to be honest. And I don't know that making a copy of their driver's license is worth the paper it's written on these days, because we've seen some great forgeries. I know that you have a process in your firm that I think is the best in the area. And frankly, it should be copied by everybody. But I'm still amazed at how many people rely on passports from South Africa or whatever. I mean, that just amazes me in this day and age.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually had a client who they got a copy of a passport. I think it was in a different country. It was, I don't know, Europe or Asia, maybe even Africa, I can't remember. And they said, well, they sent me a copy. And I said, okay, how do you know how to verify? Well, I looked on Google and it looks right. Like, again, how do you know? I don't even know what a Florida driver's license is supposed to look like. And I grew up here. I have no clue. So I don't pretend to know. Dad, it's similar to like, when you and I are asked to verify someone's mental capacity. We're not doctors. How do we know? We don't know. I don't even know your capacity.
Hey. I mean, I don't know, talking out of school. I mean, dealing with my father. I mean, he had, an illness, and he could talk a good game. He was a very good realtor, but you had never known a million years that he wasn't capable of making financial decisions.
Yeah.
He could BS till the cows come home. He was a realtor.
Yeah, he was great. He was a salesman. He was amazing.
Yeah. Think back to when you were 20 years old, and you wanted that ID that said 21. There were a lot of very real looking IDs.
I know kids that made fake IDs in high school, for crying out loud. That's the oldest thing around.
Yeah, I think, I would really ask everyone to fill out this survey. I think it could go a long way in helping us develop some sort of better process to verifying people's identity. I think that in more and more, we're going to have a process, because talking to someone on the phone, email, text is just not going to cut it, especially with all this AI tools that fraudsters will use to kind of game the system. You know, one thing I was worried about is with all these videos that we're posting online, it's going to be pretty easy for someone to fake me or either of you guys, you know, our voices. There's going to be plenty of data out there for them to take and then, you know, recreate and say anything that they want it to. So I don't know what tools are going to be available to kind of combat that. I'm going to have like a blue ribbon like tattooed on my face that changes from day to day, so you know what, you know, if it's real or not. I don't know. Who knows? That's a thing, right, Mike?
You got it.
So that, you know, I think that is the first thing we need to do when we're talking with buyers, and that is today's class topic. You know, things that we talk to buyers about. What does a buyer need to know? What do they bring to the table? What can you bring to the table? And Mike, I actually wanted to start with something that I read recently. How do you evaluate the different options that might be coming up when working with buyers in the future? You know, August 17th, that's the date this NAR settlement is supposed to take effect. We don't know how it's going to impact the industry, if at all. But let's imagine some of the scenarios that we've come across, which is you've got a buyer who kind of wants your help. You know, maybe they want help with with the contract, with inspections, finding the right referral sources. They want something, but they don't want to pay you a commission. They want to pay you some sort of transactional fee. We see that a lot of times with these flat fee listing services, where the listing agent says, here are the contracts, they post it on MLS, and then you never hear from them again. I could, you know, maybe there's a scenario where buyer's agents offer that, where they say, we'll give you the contracts, but that's it. Or we'll help you draft your offer, but that's it. You know, the thing I've noticed, and I've seen a couple agents make this mistake over the last couple of years, is that when they agree to just help them draft a contract, they don't know how to dial it back. They don't know how to just do $5,000 worth of work or $1,500 worth of work or $10,000. They only know one speed. They know all the way in or all the way out. Mike, have you seen that? I mean, what is your fear for that? Is someone kind of gauging what their value is and how to charge for it?
Well, my experience is the realtor community is very resilient. And we've seen a lot of changes through the years, and the community adapts very quickly. I mean, really, we should have been selling our value all along, but now you're going to have to be even clearer what you bring to the table. And frankly, your compensation is going to appear in a variety of different ways going forward. You will see people saying, look, yeah, I don't want to pay X%, but if you do this, then I'm willing to write a check for this. You know, you're going to see a mixed bag of how the buyer's agent will be compensated. I still think a lot of sellers will be offering compensation. They're just not going to be able to offer it through the MLS.
Well, buyer's going to have to put it as part of their offer. And so here's something that I saw recently where the buyer found the property on their own. They wanted someone to help them with the contract. And the realtor who was listing their home said, well, I can help you with that. That's not a problem. And I'll charge, you know, a flat fee. So he charges a flat fee, drafts the contract. The buyer's thrilled. And then the realtor then submits the contract to the listing agent on behalf of the buyer. And then the listing agent, when they respond, calls the buyer's agent. Even though he was just doing it as a flat fee, just drafting the contract, he's not actually representing this customer. And then inspections start and he gives them all the referrals. He goes to the inspection. Gosh, I hope he's not on this video. Goes to the inspection, way overdoing his contractual obligation with his buyer. And then he drafts the inspection notice and the election, the list of all the things that the buyer wants fixed. And then they're talking and negotiating with the listing agent, and he calls me and he's asking all these questions. And I said, hey, what are you doing? Why are you working so hard? Dad, have you seen that? Where it's like, even in your own career, you and I have talked about
I've
that.
seen lawyers. I mean, they had seminars for lawyers when I first started on representation agreements, and it's not just to say how we're going to get paid, it's also to limit the scope of representation.
Yeah.
I bet with a realtor, if a realtor is going to sign something saying I will get X dollars to prepare the contract, I really think they have to also list all the things they're not going to do, because the buyer doesn't know what they don't know. So if there's any ambiguity, the sympathy is going to be on the side of the buyer, not the realtor and not the lawyer. As you know, when I played tennis with my father, we would joke about how realtors and lawyers are generally not liked. So they're going to take the side of the buyer. So you got to list all the things you're not doing and stick to it. If you stray, the whole deal goes out the window, in my opinion, and you're fully liable for all the things that a full service realtor would otherwise do. You voided it by.
Yeah, I think there could be some. We've written articles about that, Dad. The what is it? The duty, what?
The duty of undertaking.
Duty of undertaking.
It was a Miami case.
And I'm not even so worried about the liability of it. I trust that the people that are willing to go that extra mile, they're going to do it the right way. What I worry about is you devalued your worth by agreeing to this low amount and then still did the full amount of work. So
Right.
that it really doesn't work that way. I actually had a seller called me recently, it might have been a listing agent, and he said, hey, we're selling this $100,000 lot, and we want your help just to draft the paperwork and represent the seller. And I said, I'm honored, I'd be happy to, but are you sure? Here's what we charge, and on this type of value, you might be better served going with the buyer's attorney or the buyer's title company because it might be too expensive for what you're wanting. And he goes, oh my gosh, I thought it would only be like $100. Now I could have said, I'll do it for $100, but what I did say instead was, what I've determined is either you're all the way in or you're all the way out. It's very hard to be halfway with a client. It is really hard. So if you're not good at doing it halfway, then you need to know that about yourself. And you need to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. That's not a service that I offer. But if you do want my services, this is how I do it. This is my value. These are all the scope of services that we offer. And I'd be honored. I'd be happy to. And that was the conversation I had with the listing agent.
You always use the risk reward analysis. I mean, you get some buyer spending $1 million and they're going to cut corners on the commission. You can use a Vegas metaphor. Let's say the commission's $30,000. Are you going to gamble $1 million to save $30,000? I mean, that's just not prudent.
There will be people that do that, but hopefully, however you discuss that with your customer, you've kind of find a way to do it correctly. That if you are going to do a lesser services or lesser scope, that you know how to do it. And I think that's step one when talking to buyers, things that I want to talk to a buyer about. And Mike, when I talk to a buyer, there are a lot of for sale by owners and they're not using realtors. We do get involved on those to a certain level, but I always tell them in advance, just so you know, we are not like realtors. We're not going to be holding your hand every single moment. We're not going to be going to the inspection and going to the walkthrough. I actually had a listing agent text me yesterday and she goes, Christian, if you're so concerned, why don't you come to the walkthrough? And I'm like, that's just not what we do. That's what a realtor does. That's why you guys get paid what you get paid. It's why you work as hard as you do, because there is a difference to the services that you offer compared to what we offer. It's different. It's very different.
Again, listing all the things you're not going to do is an indirect way of showing your value. These are all the things you normally would be doing.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Christian. I mean, do you find
turning the table? So I like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the higher end deals, let's say it's a $2 million or a $3 million transaction. Do you get less blowback on what you charge for a fee? or is it the low end deals, or is there a difference at all?
Well, I think it's still random. We've got a really big deal coming up next week, and they haven't
Yeah.
asked about the fees. They don't seem to care.
Yeah.
But we did a big deal just a week and a half ago, and I think the guy tried to renegotiate with me twice.
I remember.
Within the last 10 days of closing, he renegotiated twice. We did a deal when I first came back to Naples. The guy bought half a dozen properties. He negotiated for me to do something for free or whatever it was, and then he came back wanting a 20% discount, and then he came back wanting a 30% discount. That on the other side of things, though, the really cheap properties, that's when they tell you, oh, like the $100,000 lot sale, they say,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I can't afford that. You got to give me a discount. So the middle, I don't know. I think it goes to more the buyer's personality than it does a whole lot else.
I mean, sometimes I can tell what they do for a living. If it's a CFO, they look at the fees real closely. If it's a CEO, and it's a high-end deal, they recognize the value right away. They do these types of transactions day in and day out for a living.
Yeah. Dad, I think you and I are a good example. And Mike, you're a business owner as well. We have this, fatigue on cost. We have to make decisions every minute of every day on running a business. So when it comes to something like this, we kind of see the value. We're willing to pay for it as long as it's explained to us. If we think we're being manipulated or that we can get a better value somewhere else, more services, even if we pay more, we'll go the other way. But if it's something that just makes sense to us, let's do a role play here. Dad, you want to buy a $5 million home in Cape Cod, and you go up there and you're like, I don't need a realtor. I don't need this, or I just need someone to help me with the contracts. I know how to do real estate. I've been doing it my whole life. And the realtor stops you and says, Don, that's fine. If that's the way you want to go, so be it. But here's what you're not thinking about. You're not up in Cape Cod all that often. You don't know the difference between East Falmouth and West Falmouth. You don't know if it should be, wood construction or concrete, and the lifespan of a cedar shake roof. You don't know this stuff, and you don't know taxes, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know that. And oh, by the way, Don, you don't live here. Who's going to be at the inspection? And you're like, wow, that makes more sense.
I use my father on any big real estate transaction I did down here. One, because I knew I was too close to the deal and I would be making emotional decisions. And two, he's just street smart. I mean, he could deal with the developers much better than I could.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I recognize my own weakness. You get too close to it, and I'm going to make errors in my judgment.
Yeah. So that's I think that's a big thing we're all going to have to figure out and overcome, is this determining our value and figuring out how to be involved, if at all, right? Because if it doesn't make sense for you and your business, then you shouldn't be involved, or you should just give them the advice and walk away and say, look, I'm happy to give you the advice, but I'm going to let you handle everything. Just good luck. And if it gets to a point where you need my help, you know what I cost, you know what I charge.
I typically tell the agents, like with walkthroughs, because I've been asked to do walkthroughs with people, and I mean, I am a total moron when it comes to reading blueprints and discerning, is there milk in the refrigerator or not? It'd be right in front of my face and I don't see it. So I make a joke out of it, which it really is the truth. I mean, I cannot read blueprints, even though my father was a builder. Says, you don't want me doing a walkthrough because I'm a total moron with this. My skill set is with the law. I can do the law real well, but get somebody who does a living, not me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, Mike, I know that you have a short time frame and you're gonna be heading out. Tell me, in your mind, you meet with a buyer, they agree to work with you. What's the advice? What's the top thing in your mind that you want to talk to a buyer about? The thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again.
Well, you already hit one of the biggies, and that is to let them know that wire fraud is not isolated. It is in the area.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use the word rampant, but I'd be real close to that. They need to know to use a reputable title company attorney and don't rely on an email. Call, meet with the people, find out what protocols are in place. Not all law firms have the same protocols. You want someone who's on top of their game, and certainly you guys are. The areas I hit besides that are inspections. Don't.
Good. This is a really important topic because
You're
not, you know,
spending
most of our
all that-
buyers are not from here, right, Mike?
Yeah, you're spending all that money on a big acquisition and you want to save $1,000, a couple $1,000 on inspections by not having them? That's crazy. I mean, really, and from a realtor standpoint, always advise them in writing so that that doesn't come back to haunt you.
Let's do a role play, Mike. I'm the buyer, and you tell me, hey, Christian, you should get an inspection. And I say, Mike, are you sure? I mean, they're like $1,000. Why would I? This seller's done a great job keeping up the house. Why do I need an inspection? You know, or like that sounds like a ripoff. What do you think? What do you say to that, Mike? How do you
Person
combat
house,
that?
brand new house. Why?
Well, I can go into some of the horror stories, and I can tell you years ago, we had a simple lot acquisition. It was a beautiful lot, had like 3 trees on it. The person said, why do I need that inspected? And so they didn't get their inspection. And then when they went to build their house, they found out that 40, 50 years ago, there was a junkyard underneath that lot. And they were pulling out engines from cars and everything in the world from that lot. So on the surface, it looked fine. But if they'd had an inspection, done a little due diligence on there, they really would have saved themselves a lot of money.
So I had this question just maybe Monday, so 2 days ago. The buyer and seller had met up. They were neighbors, and they came to a deal. And the buyer's like, I don't need an inspection. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And this is where, you know, I wasn't representing the buyer or the seller. I was actually brought into the deal by the seller, but I felt it was important to say this. I said, you know, Mr. Buyer, you really should get an inspection. I said, I don't care who brought me into this deal. We kind of want you to get an inspection. We want you to get all your questions answered, as opposed to, you know, the day before closing, you do a walkthrough and you didn't realize, or even the day after closing, you didn't realize the water heater was 12 years old, not 2 years old. Now you feel misled. No one told you. No one told you. Do your own research, get an inspection. And then the other question that we get a lot, Dad, is, should I get a survey? And this is where I think realtors do get themselves into hot water. And in fact, I had this conversation with a buyer yesterday. And the buyer said, Christian, do I really need a survey? Your office asked me if I need a survey. And I said, well, I think his name was Chris. I said, Chris, you just asked an attorney if you should get a survey because you don't have one. Of course, I'm going to say yes. Of course. I don't care what the cost is. You don't know what you don't know. Right, Dad?
Yeah, and again, you don't let the $1,000 or the $2,000 survey tail wag the dog. I mean, it could be $1 million.
I think realtors get themselves in trouble, and I see it frequently when the realtor doesn't think the value is there. So the realtor's doing their own calculation of whether it's worth it, and then telling the buyer or seller yes or no.
You know, in a weird
opposed
way,
to just saying, here's the value of a survey, here's the cost. You decide.
it's risk reward. I mean, are you willing to gamble your purchase price against the savings of a survey? And
Yeah.
the answer is no. If you're in
I
that,
used to see when realtors were used to doing maybe $500,000 deals or $300,000 deals. That was kind of their average, maybe a lower
Right.
end deal, 300,000-400,000. And then all of a sudden they, you know, a couple of years later, they find themselves doing $1.5 million deals or $2.5 million deals. That buyer is at a different value proposition. $400 or $500 for a survey is not a problem for that buyer. It might be for a $300,000 buyer, and you know they're just barely qualifying. But at $1.5 million, pay the $500. So your advice should always be: we always recommend a survey. Here's the cost. If you have questions or you have concerns, talk to the attorney, talk to the surveyor, ask about that.
Yeah,
Back-
Christian, can I hit 2 more points? And then
Please, Mike, go for it. And then you got to go.
You guys, Don brought up the walkthrough, and one of the emerging things we're starting to see now that washers, dryers, stoves, et cetera, are getting smart, so to speak.
Okay,
What we're seeing with the walkthrough is people swapping out, where you've got a
yes,
really nice washer and dryer and you swap it out for a knockoff GE model, whatever. So it's not just looking for repairs like it was in the old days. You got to make sure everything's there that you contracted for.
yeah.
That's point number one. Point number two, and I'm sure you'll go with this one. Insurance nowadays, you got to jump on that early. You
Yeah,
can't,
it's got to be one of the first things you do.
right, right.
Almost before the offer, because a lot of things the insurance agent is gonna focus on, like limited roof life, the age of the hot water heater, polybutylene piping. Those are things that are not defects under the contract, but the insurance company considers them a problem. So,
I'll give you one final thought.
One more and then you're leaving, Mike.
The guy that's leaving, or the guy that doesn't want to get the inspection, wants to save the money, I would turn to him as he's in the house and say, okay, what's the radon reading for this property? He'd go, what? What's
Yeah.
that? Or you
Or
don't
what
know.
I like to ask is, what's the age of the water heater? Does the water heater work? You know, does
Oh.
do all the GFCI outlets work? What about the fan in the guest bedroom? You don't know. You don't know.
Do you
Get
do
look.
open permits? I mean, what, do you have cancer that runs in the family? I mean,
Mike, good points. Go ahead. Get out of here.
I'm out of here.
hey, Mike,
Thanks, guys.
good luck.
So Jackie actually asked a great question. I used to get asked this question a lot. What type of inspector inspects vacant land to detect underground issues? And so I'll give you this scenario. When I used to build subdivisions, we had 180 days for inspections. And someone would say, oh my gosh, what are you going to do for 6 months of inspections? And there was a lot. It was almost more to do than if it was a single family home, because we're worried about zoning, we're worried about the title. If I want to build a 10,000 square foot house on this piece of land, I have to make sure that the zoning allows it. And so that's definitely part of inspections. We would also look for protected species. We would do an environmental study. So in Mike's example, an environmental study, an ESA, would have saved the buyer's butt, because they go and they dig into the ground, they walk the lot, they look for, protected species. There's a lot to do. And then you go down to the county and you ask them, can I build on this lot? If I come to you tomorrow with blueprints, can I get a permit? Those questions can't, you kind of want to be under contract with this free look period so you can do that due diligence. And that way, when you buy the house or buy the lot, you can start day one. You don't have to wait 30 days to do your due diligence at that point.
I had one a couple of years ago, and they started out with a phase 1 environmental audit, and that would show, they just look at the records to see if there ever was a dump there, for example.
Yeah, that's what the ESAs will do too.
Yeah, and if there was a dump, then they move to phase 2 and they go digging to see what's in the soil and does it have to be removed? I mean,
They'll look at, like, if it was a commercial building, let's say it's a restaurant and you're buying this restaurant, they'll do an ESA on those, because potentially before it was a restaurant, maybe it was a dry cleaner. Before that, maybe it was something else that was, maybe a brownfield or something. In Atlanta, we had that a lot. You'll see that the more remote you get, the more likely for those illegal dumping sites to exist.
Right.
And then, let's say it's Southwest Florida on the water, maybe you want to inspect the seawall. Yeah, maybe you want to look for gopher tortoises or burrowing owls, or any number of protected species on the land. You want to know what your cost to build, permitting cost, all those things. You have due diligence. You want to interview builders. You want to bring the builder to the site.
Yeah, meet with the building department.
It's relevant. We had a closing just maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was a 10-acre purchase, and the buyer was buying it for land, but he kept an inspection period because there were 3 old houses on the property, and the houses were worth nothing. He was going to have to tear them down.
Right.
So he does his inspection. He goes out to the property. He finds people living in them.
Oh.
That was a very important inspection note. There were people squatting in the homes. that the seller didn't know about. So there's another reason for an inspection.
Well, I even get asked that on new homes. If you're buying something from Stark or Lennar or whoever, do you get an inspector to do the walkthrough? And I say yes, because they can pick up whether or not everything was properly integrated. I mean, because they have a
Yeah.
bunch of contractors and they're supposed to fit it all together.
Yeah.
And you typically have a 1-year warranty. Well, if you can pick up something that's, in the growth phases within the first year, you don't have to wait for it to present itself 3 years later.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing that we see all the time is cost. I don't think that we do a good enough job explaining the different costs, the closing costs that a buyer may have. And I'll give you a couple examples. First thing I want to point to is our calculator that we have on our website. You can go right to our website to get a link to it. You can ask me for it. I'll happily provide it. And you can even create a sign-in. So I have a sign-in, and you can do an estimate. You can do title quotes, closing disclosure, seller nets, which I love, and you can play with it, multiple offers, and kind of put in different scenarios. So let's do a title quote. Someone's asking me, well, what does it cost to blank? What is it going to cost? And I say, all right, well, let's look at it. Let's say it's $1 million purchase, and we're going to get a $500,000 loan. First question, who pays for title insurance? And it's a really great prompt because maybe you forgot to bring that up. Maybe you forgot. Maybe like I had a lender who told his buyer, oh, the seller pays that, but he didn't actually look at the contract. So when I'm prompted by this, I'm like, all right, what contract am I using? What county are we in? Let's say it's buyer only. Prior policy, did the seller own this or buy it within the last 3 years? I got to ask them about that. Maybe I can save some money. Calculate the fees. It'll populate everything for you. You can email it. You can play with it. You can modify it. This might be a bigger cost than the buyer was expecting. I think this needs to be talked about. The seller might not realize that there's doc stamps. That doc stamps fee should be on there. Yeah, and then they can ask, well, why is the title insurance so expensive? And we can answer that question appropriately, as opposed to the seller finding out the day before closing that they are paying for title insurance and you forgot to mention it. Oh, by the way, yes, there's an extra $5,000 cost on the line for you on this. That's a rude awakening the day before the day of closing, that's for sure. So Dad, here was the scenario I got yesterday. The buyer was told by his lender that closing costs, I think it was a $400,000 purchase. He's getting a loan. And the lender said, well, your closing costs should be about $10,000, $12,000. And then I think they've been under contract for about 10 days. They get an updated closing disclosure and it says 20,000.
Right.
And the buyer freaked out. Wait a second. He told me 10, he told me 12, he told me 8, not 20. And so I said, well, let's look at all the numbers. And we went over everything. The big thing that changed was the insurance. So the insurance, the lender was guessing maybe it's a $3,000 policy. It ended up being an $8,000 policy. So you have to pay, and this was the other thing, the buyer did not realize that he pays for the insurance, the homeowner's insurance, day one. You pay it in advance for the whole year. So, and then you have to escrow for it. So he's like, oh my, I didn't see that. And then taxes you have to escrow for, and we're already close to when the tax bills will be paid. So that's where the swing was. It was the lender probably not doing their due diligence and really looking at the numbers. And then he underestimated the insurance costs. And by then, like you mentioned, Dad, insurance, a lot of times it's not a defect under the contract. You can't terminate just because your insurance policy went from $3,500 to $8,500. That's not something you can normally terminate on.
A related issue to that, Christian, while you're talking about it, oftentimes you'll see the seller giving the buyer credit for closing costs. I usually recommend you specify which costs, because you get into a big argument over what's the cost under the contract versus what prepaid or escrow required by the lender.
Oh, I think that's a really great point. I'll show you guys another screen share here. So this is something that we see buyers do and sellers a lot. they talk about, buyer and seller shall split closing costs. Like you said, Dad, what does that mean? Does that include survey? What if the seller didn't want one? Does that include insurance for the year? Well, to a buyer, it's considered closing costs, but not for the seller. So what we like to do is we go to the section, what is it, standard E and
There's
F?
the E and F.
Standard E and F right here. This is the NABOR form. FAR/BAR has the same thing. Standard E is seller's instruments and inspection expenses, and F is buyers. And I just point through them, all of them. Or I would say, seller shall give, like we could do a quote for your buyer, get an amount, and then you go to the seller for that as a credit. So there, you don't have to define closing costs. You could just say, well, it looks like it's going to cost my buyer $20,000. Let's ask the seller for a $10,000 credit towards closing costs and prepaids. Then we're not having to define what the closing cost is. We're just saying, you're giving me a credit. I get to use this.
Much simpler. I mean, again, to give an extreme example, you look at F, the attorney's fees for the buyer is a closing cost. So if you get a buyer's attorney who's charging $10,000, that's being split.
Right. Right. And, you see a lot of times where the seller's giving a credit and the buyer's searching for closing costs. They're looking for buying down points on the loan. They're looking for that survey, what can we jam in there now? Can we prepay assessments for the HOA?
Yes.
Jackie had a good follow-up. She said, is an ESA covering all these different aspects on a land inspection? No. ESAs are just environmental study analysis or something like that. And there's an ESA 1, and you can also do ESA 2 and possibly even ESA 3. It is specifically environmental. That's all that is. Separately, you would do your title search. Separately, you would do your zoning or entitlements evaluation. You might even do a zoning application to get it rezoned. Maybe you're buying agricultural land, but you wanted it for commercial. And so you're building into your inspection period the right to get it rezoned. So the ESA is specific to environmental items. The other stuff you would do separately. You might do a building analysis. I've seen on contracts, Dad, where we put, the contract is contingent upon it being a buildable lot. And they put quotes buildable. That's pretty good. It's probably not good enough. We need to define, like, what do I mean by buildable? I wanted that 10,000 square foot mansion, and I wanted a pool, and I wanted all this stuff. And if they say, well, I can get the 10,000 square foot, but I can't get the pool, maybe that's not buildable to me. It sounds buildable, but not to the buyer. So be more specific. Be more specific.
Back to the environmental audits, whenever I've run into those, it usually entails land that's rather large and it's going to be subdivided into multiple lots. So you want to make sure that we get the title work done before the expiration of the due diligence period. Because typically you're looking at use restrictions and a whole bunch of other things, not just marketable title.
Exactly. I'll give you the example. You hit it on the head, Dad. I had a builder, they wanted it was like 100-acre land, but they had a plan for it. They wanted, 30 homes over there and 40 over that area. But when they did the title search, they saw that there were these easements and restrictions to the middle of the property, which totally messed up their plan. And they all of a sudden they knew that even though they were buying 100 acres, really only maybe 40 acres were usable. That was a huge problem that, yes, it was clear title under the contract, but it wasn't really useful. Not good for our sake. Let me look at the rest of my notes. So insurance, looking at the different kinds of inspections. Well, I think that'll probably be the one thing we'll close with.
Seller's disclosures, condo receipts, things like that.
Yeah, all those things are very relevant to a buyer. Do your due diligence. The thing I want to lead with or finish with for a buyer is that I see this over and over and over again, and I was dealing with it this morning. Inspections don't mean that you can wait on paying your second deposit.
Yeah.
So standard contract, whether it's NABOR or FAR/BAR, FAR/BAR is a little different, but on NABOR, when you make your first deposit and then you do your inspections, you make your election, and then the seller doesn't get back right away. How long do they have to respond?
10 days. You have
10 days. So you make your election, the seller can wait 10 days before responding. And in the meantime, you've got this, the seller's like, wait, where's that second deposit? And they're doing it on purpose. They want you to make the deposit before they respond to you.
Although the other side that the seller's working on it, they're checking with their own inspectors or their own repair people. And oh, by the way,
Yeah.
where's the deposit? So
Exactly, we're working on it. Where's the
we're
deposit, by
working
the
real
way?
hard. We'll get right back to you. And by the way, the
By
second
the
deposit,
way, where's that deposit?
and then you lower the hammer and say, sorry.
So this is something that you want to make sure your buyer gets it so that they're not surprised by it, because as soon as they become surprised by it, they think they're being played. They think that maybe you've made a mistake, that you're not as good as they thought you were. That's the hard part, is we're just trying to get in front of all this stuff. And to that point, Dad, I've been saying it since I got back down here. I like the as-is contract. If I don't like something, I can back out. If I'm going to give some buyer advice and tell them to go hunt for themselves, I'm going to give them the as-is contract to go hunt with, especially if I'm not there to hold their hand every minute and make sure that they know exactly how this standard contract works. So that's, it's still my soapbox. It's still the thing I want for a buyer, especially if I can't be there with them every step of the way.
Did initially, Christian, I do. You've convinced me that it's a hell of a lot easier than arguing about what's working condition, what's cosmetic. And quicker. I mean, in some situations, people can't wait 35 days to find out what's happening.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Dad, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope you liked that. I kind of had fun. I was inspired to do it. So good luck with everything. Enjoy your summer, and call if you need us.
All right, man.